Welcome everyone. Today I have Brittany and Dan from Google. We're doing something a little bit different than our traditional kind of Lamarck leadership series. This is part of our broader vision of bringing our thought leadership and sort of overall things that we're thinking about internally to life. Lamarck leadership series is really designed to speak to organizational leaders across various different categories, verticals, and domains. Now we're launching a second sort of content line, which is the masterclass. And here we're going to be conversing with sort of key strategic partners on the platform side, on the creative front, and internally even within Lamarck, picking their brain on kind of what they're seeing from their lens, from their side of the world. And then we're going to be working on literature as well, so research reports, blogs, etc. But today I'm incredibly excited to host Dan and Brittany from Google. Our relationship with Google at Lamarck extends almost a decade from an advertising perspective. We're super grateful to have the support that we have and have the strategic lens that both Brittany and Dan and the rest of their team provides, both on best practices and forward thinking when it comes to account structure and performance marketing, but also just enabling our team around L&D and making sure that we're not just following best practices, but certainly working with them to help define them to some extent. So Dan and Brittany, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Awesome. So what we'll do in terms of agenda is we've got so many things to go over. I intend to cover with both of you kind of Google advertising best practices, broadly speaking. We're probably going to focus our energy towards direct response best practices, since performance marketing is very much top of mind for everyone from large retailers as they think about digital transformation to upstarts in e-commerce and mobile apps and beyond. We're then going to go into kind of things that both of you are observing within your respective portfolios around account strategy in the platform, but also around agency kind of executive meetings and what's top of mind there. I'd love to also just kind of whiteboard common mistakes that a lot of advertisers make when there's volatility and how you recommend kind of managing the volatility. Finally, we'll get into YouTube best practices and kind of leveraging the broader Google properties and all the different kind of platforms and channels that fall into the media mix. So with that said, what I want to do is I want to do a quick intro. Dan, we'll start with you and work our way to Brittany, and then we'll dive into our bullet points. So tell us a little bit about kind of your background and what you do at Google.
Yeah, sure. So my role at Google is to connect with our agency partners. We're in the Managed Agency Partnership Program, and I connect with leaders such as Faheem, and we try and educate our agency partners at scale for the growth of their agencies, right? So every agency has a little bit different vibe, whether it's on top of their own programs and algorithms that they utilize Google for, or if they're fully bought into all automation usage that Google provides. So we make sure that we understand in total what the opportunity is for the agency to work with Google and where we can help support that. My role, again, is at scale and making sure that our best practices are unified across the board. And I'll let Brittany talk about her role, but her and I work together in tandem, whereas she focuses a lot more on the accounts that Lamarck has and our other agency partners. So I want to make sure that what I'm doing is education through the C-suite, and then that information and that responsibility and that conversation that the agency wants to have internally funnels down to the other aspects of the business.
Yeah. So I think just similarly to what Dan had mentioned is I work pretty closely with him as well as many of you on the call, just as it relates to priority accounts, specifically within the Lamarck book of business. So in particular, I dig a little deeper into each account and understanding what are the marketing objectives of which both your team as well as the client want to meet, and how can I help you guys in bringing up certain strategies and adopting new products as it relates to Google. So definitely really excited to in particularly speak to all of you guys today, because I know that there's been a lot of progress in which Lamarck has made, especially within the past few months.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. When we think about this concept of Google best practices, I think, like 10 years ago, it was so simple, right? There's basic keyword structures, campaign structures, and just being like smart and frankly, very manual and tactical. We've come such a long way, both in terms of how Google thinks about advertising, thinking way beyond kind of Search Console and PPC. When you hear today, Dan, Brittany, tell me more about Google advertising best practices at a high level. How do you educate clients within not only your book of business, but even broadly speaking in the community? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll start, and then Brittany can feel free to give her own perspective. But so I've been at Google a little bit over a year, and when I joined, my previous roles at previous companies, I sort of owned information in some way, right? And I could figure that out or go to a resource to get more information if needed. I figured out pretty quickly at Google that it's just impossible to really be the owner, especially in a sales role where you're trying to be multifaceted. You really can't own a whole bunch of one thing. So using our resources internally is obviously very important. But at the end of the day, I think a best practice is one size doesn't fit all situations because of format, bidding strategies, and products. But there are a couple ways that we can focus a client's directive towards, additional things that will work for all of the products. So one of those things would be make sure you're on the same page with your agency or whoever is handling your business with lower funnel and upper funnel, as well as making sure you have one single source of truth for measurement, right? So if you level set expectations from the beginning, we've had clients that continue to tell us one thing, and then 6 months later they say, oh, actually our goal is to sell the business at the end of this year. Well, that's fine. We are a managed agency team and we will help support your business goals, whatever they are. But the more you share with us on what your directives are, the more we can help keep our ears and eyes open for strategies that would help you achieve your goals. So I think sometimes, as agency partners as well, sometimes that's hard for you guys to get that information. And sometimes even on the phone with clients, it's hard to get fully understanding what they're trying to do, because a lot of these directives come from the C-level. And a lot of times C-level executives and clients aren't the ones that necessarily are on the weekly calls, right?
Right.
So I think at the end of the day, a couple of things that I would say best practices are: make sure all of the information is shared with your partners, because then everyone's on the same page and you can move forward in lockstep. And then you can also hold each other accountable. So in 3 months time, 6 months time, 12 months time, you can go back and say, oh, hey, where are we on this goal that we were trying to do? We want to achieve 15% increase in revenue in 2020. 2020 is a weird year, so that might not be the goal at the end of the year, but that's one best practice that I think we would emphasize, because everyone then is understanding of the same situation. Also, I would say managing performance through bids, not necessarily budgets, and maximize the highest performing campaigns and then scale from there, right? So Brittany is definitely the expert on campaign management and such, but those practices in total that we would like to see across the board probably set everything up for success to move forward.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brittany, let's talk a little bit. Thank you for sharing, Dan. Let's talk a little bit about kind of at the account level, when we think about direct response campaigns, particularly for clients that are, let's say in the performance marketing space. How do you walk us through your playbook in terms of kind of best practices?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to what Dan had mentioned. Is internally, our Google teams and our team in particular, we recognize that we have so many products and formats of which you have available by advertiser. So the first thing is to figure out, again, from a client standpoint, what is that business goal and what does that business goal translate into a campaign goal. So let's just say, for example, a DR standpoint, what we've seen perform really well for DR and in particular e-com advertisers within the retail space is smart shopping campaigns. So I know that many strategists on the mark are slowly starting to adopt this particular format overall. But it's thinking about, okay, let's just say, for example, your client assigned you with increasing profit as the business goal of, let's just say, 2020. That means that the campaign would translate to the fact of how can you get, the best target return on ad spend. And then that would then translate to a smart shopping campaign specifically bidding off of target ROAS. So what we recognize is that obviously adoption is something that will take a little bit more time to adopt in the sense by advertiser. So we would suggest starting off with, those high performing campaigns, testing those campaigns from a A/B standpoint, and then assessing performance from there.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. So smart shopping seems to be top of mind for a lot of us. Something that I think a lot about is the importance of creative when it comes to a lot of particularly internet retailers and direct response advertisers. How does a brand retain its brand equity while enabling very hardcore DR campaign strategies like smart shopping?
Yeah, so I think that this is something that has come up actually a ton, especially given the times of which, our world is in and the economy is in. I know in particular, with your team and specifically Greyhound, we have been working a ton as it relates to specific insights and how can you inform your customers in understanding the brand that you want to be during these volatile times. So that's where different formats and channels such as YouTube really come into play, just because it really is the platform in the area of which you really have an incredible reach. So, we have over, I think, 2 billion monthly active users specifically on YouTube. And we know that every day there's over 1 billion hours of video consumed. So how can you make sure that your brands are present and in front of these users, especially during this time as they're at home?
Thank you for sharing. I think YouTube is certainly a huge opportunity for advertisers across the globe. So we'll dig into that. Something that I want to poke at just for a second is measurement and attribution. Dan, you mentioned, every company kind of has their own format and form of source of truth. Coincidentally, measurement, interestingly enough, sounds like a very scientific term, but it's half science and half art. And there's no easy answer because last click attribution in a vacuum sort of makes sense when your media mix isn't complex. What do you educate your clients with and what is that conversation like as they start to think about reevaluating the last click model and walk us through kind of that framework thinking?
Yeah, it was a pretty big initiative for Google to move people off of last click over the past 2 years, just because it is so antiquated. There are other multiple data offerings, you could call them, I guess, or opportunities within the Google platform. So, no one is right, but there are some that are better for large scale, right? So data-driven attribution is something that takes advantage of all of the data points, right? That we would recommend to clients that have a lot of activity, right? So if you're a local shop that has, 3 retail stores, right, you probably don't get the influx that you would use there. So you'd probably want to use, something of time decay, right? You want people to come into the store, especially if there are sales or opportunities there. So it's really what is going to align to your business. But last click in general is, it was the best for the time, right? It was the best thing that we had 10, 15, 20 years ago when it was coming out. We didn't have all these other signals. We didn't have the ability to check in on so many data points. And that's evolved the same way Google has, in automation services. 10 years ago, you started this conversation with, the media agency, the performance media agency looked a lot different 10 years ago, and you needed expertise and skill sets to be able to pull those levers at the right time to really maximize. Now automation for Google is hands down the way to go in the sense of catching the peak and avoiding the valleys to do those. Now, we still think that even more so now, the agency is much more important for strategizing. They're much more important for having partnerships like this. Our team only works through agencies such as yours. So the agency, instead of having skill sets in the day-to-day operation of pulling levers, you know, our best agencies practice setting up their holiday schedules, right, for Q4 to take real advantage of that in August, right? In August, they start planning that. 10 years ago, there's probably no performance team that was thinking, you know, 3 months ahead to really capture that around Black Friday, because they're like, hey, when it comes up, our team will be working really late those nights and we'll pull those levers and we'll grab them. That's what we're here for. That's what we're great. And conversely, what we've been seeing is a lot of new business pitches over the past 2+ years have moved from like the ROI, right? The return on investment that the agency programs can, or the agencies can give. And now the ROI is not discussed in the same way. The conversation is around, you know, what value adds that the agency can give to these smaller clients all the way up to the big ones, and strategic thinking, the opportunities to do those things. So it's really, I started there with attribution, but my answer goes so much further, because again, it's not one size fits all, but there are sizes for really big opportunities, and then there's ones for much smaller clients that are looking for very specific attribution models.
Yeah. I think I can also, just one thing to add is just as we think about the digital space and how it's evolving, just going back to YouTube in particular, we know, especially online, that there's so many different channels of which a user is influenced in purchasing a product or discovering a new brand or service. So as we think about last click attribution in the market, we were always considered the ones, you know, once you know the brand, you pretty much go to Google, make that conversion. But how can we think of the bigger picture, specifically in channels such as YouTube and display, and really emphasizing the different touch points it takes for a user to create that conversion on search or shopping. So one of our newest reports that we have available is a cross-network report, and it's actually still in beta, but it's a way in which we want to prove out to our customers as well as advertisers in the value of thinking outside of last click. So what this report really does is it understands the conversion path and how it relates to YouTube and specifically search. So you're able to understand within a conversion if that conversion was potentially influenced specifically with a YouTube ad.
Love that. You know, I think something we think a lot about internally at Lamarck is this kind of 101, 201, 301 concept and model. 101 is sort of basic kind of business intelligence, right? And agnostic to an attribution model. 201 is really taking it a step further, which we define as fractional attribution. It's really a form of really multi-touch attribution, and that can leverage data-driven modeling, that can leverage time decay, whatever it might be. And then 301 is really the most advanced, which what we call like incrementality driven and or causal attribution. And so like would that sale have happened regardless of the media being on or not? And that's really getting into server-side API and things of that sort. But I think for all intent and purposes, last click attribution is a simple methodology and framework where almost all brands, even today, get started with. But I think all three of us would agree that that is not, certainly should not be the ultimate source of truth, especially, Brittany, to your point that the customer journey is non-linear, right? So I might see an ad on a social media platform. I might get retargeted on another platform. I then submit an email, get a promo, and then search for it and buy. Well, on the front end, I'm getting like 5 touches, right? And on the back end, it's only 1 sale. But all 5 of those platforms are raising their hand and saying, I drove the sale. When in reality, it's only 1 sale. And so if you're operating in a last click environment, that last platform is getting it, even though something else could have influenced or assisted in the sale. So for everyone listening, I think there's likely value in having a broader and a deeper conversation on measurement and attribution. I feel like I can talk all day about it, so we're gonna move on to really the next thing is kind of a bird's eye view as the two of you are looking at your portfolios. across whether it's agencies, clients, et cetera. What are some of the things that you're observing? I'd love to just listen in and hear what others are thinking and how they're tackling the world.
Yeah, I can
Yes.
start. Oh.
Go ahead.
I think it was very similar to what Dan had mentioned earlier, is just the adoption of automation and just taking advantage of smart bidding methods within our tools in order to free up time for you guys to leverage or create insights in order to create more robust strategies. So I think that is a huge way in which Google is moving forward, is how can we better assist your teams in taking advantage of these machine learning algorithms in order to better succeed for our advertisers overall.
Nice.
Yeah, and to add with that, because again, I feel like Faheem, you'd agree for this topic, we could spend maybe 6 hours just on these like 5 topics, just talking about these types of things. So to emphasize that point, automation is something that Google is continuing to invest in, and there are a lot of agencies out there that are relying on their own tech, which is great. It's proprietary and understand that, but where these agencies sometimes I think are going to falter are not understanding how much emphasis is going into automation. So the automation is going to be the North Star for what Google continues to develop. And if there is automation or proprietary tools that are developed that are going to take advantage of the manual processes that Google has started in the business with 20 plus years ago, that is going to be a really challenging space for these agencies to play in. I'm not saying that everyone needs to adopt all Google products tomorrow in order to be successful. But what I'm saying is that our engineering teams and the emphasis of Google is always updating and pushing the limits is always going to look towards the automation to take advantage of what a machine can do that better than what a human can do. And we know for the foreseeable future, machines will not be able to strategize as well. And that's, again, going back to the agency, the real crux and butter of what the agency will offer is going to be that strategy and leaning in and that client touch as opposed to pulling these levers within the tool.
No. I think when I think about the concept of automation, I think there's a natural fear in the media buying world that automation is designed to replace the human capital. And I actually strongly disagree. I look at it as the following. When clients hire, whether it's us or any other good partner, what they're really bringing on is a Formula One driver, right? And our objective is to win the race, right? And go as fast as possible, be smart around the turns, and avoid any accidents on the track and just win. It doesn't matter if we're shifting manually, right? Like, I think about that concept quite a bit, that a Formula One driver would rather not shift gears in the midst of going 150, 200 miles an hour. And so our job is to go 200 miles an hour and win the race on behalf of our clients and know exactly when to twist and turn and pit stopping and all of that, right? The metaphor around car, like automotive racing or motorsports, makes a lot of sense here because people that are purists still want the stick shift, right? And people that are purists still want the manual media buying kind of hand-holding. And it's a way to display value creation. When in reality, to me, it kind of becomes a platform. Do you want to take the stairs to go up or can you take the elevator, right? And so ultimately the objective is to go to the top floor. So that's how I think about automation, and automation without human capital and strategy is broken. And so leveraging smart advertising strategies, media mix modeling, measurement techniques, creative messaging. I mean, there's like 55 other things that need to happen. Changing bids and budgets is just one component that's getting automated. And so for anyone listening, I think there's a lot of wisdom in the concept of automation. And it's, I think often a lot of media buyers and a lot of agencies might feel defensive as a function of that. The work isn't getting automated. If anything, you're getting time back to think more critically and strategically about what you want to do. And so is that how kind of you guys are thinking about it internally at Google as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, my role as trying to, at scale, provide leaders of organizations the opportunity for their teams and agencies to evolve. That's what I lead with, right? Look, Google has created an incredibly large marketplace, and anyone tied to that thought process, I think, can be successful, right? They were successful way before I got here. I'm just trying to help other agencies become successful using the Google tools, and I think we have a whole bunch of products that can help a lot of agencies do that. And a lot of times, we get the pushback of, well, you guys are just going to share all these products with us because Google wants money, right? In all honesty, Google does well even without agency teams, right? There's a whole bunch of, there's tens of 10 million plus accounts that people handle on their own, and they run through small business themselves, right? So what we're here to do is actually add value to those. And I think, are very few other organizations that provide teams of this size. Your team at Lamarck has 3+ people just dedicated to your business to make sure that it's running smoothly. And we do this across our agency program to make sure you guys are getting the most up-to-date betas, getting the most up-to-date account combinations for, yes, what is the best way to set things up, but even further than that, are you thinking about these types of things? Are you utilizing these types of products, and having your team to be able to jump on those calls or strategize or whiteboard, as opposed to saying, I'm bogged down in all the details of lever pulling, is what you're really asking your agency to do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that comes to mind is, we're almost 3 months into this, into COVID, and the world is very different now than it was a couple of months ago. When COVID hit, I think a lot of agency partners and even clients were doing lever pulling, right? And so they just felt more comfortable kind of being in the driver's seat again, and like bringing back the stick shift. So talk to us a little bit about, when COVID hit, did you start to see some of that kind of reaction from people, and how do you coach them out of that?
Yeah, so I'll briefly talk very high level. Britt has obviously incredible experience with accounts, but in general, we pretty much saw clients do 3 things, right? There were some that actually started investing a lot more because this stay at home actually was good for their product or business or service, right? A very easy example of that is like streaming services, right? They were already set up to do these things. And then the people listening probably have some type of product that they purchased over the past 3 months that they might not have purchased in 2019 at this time because they are home, whether it's something for the family, some type of hobby that they wanted. So we saw an incredible increase with those types of products, whatever they could be. Then we saw a majority of them start assessing, like, what does this mean for my business? Where do I go? At the beginning, Jan 1, 2020, there was probably a whole bunch of businesses in the first half of the year that would say, I want 20% growth, right? But now we're sitting here on first week in June, and a lot of clients are really happy with 0% growth, but 0% decline, right? So things obviously changed, and they were assessing, they're figuring it out. And then you obviously had some in the red, which are their business relies on store traffic, actual foot traffic in stores. Some of those businesses have shifted, and I think governments have been incredibly lenient, local municipalities as well, with allowing those, such as restaurants, to provide like cocktail packages now when you buy dinners at some of these restaurants. So I think overall we saw those 3 buckets as the main aspect. And I think our team has been, the ones that are doing really successful, that's great. We can help like course correct a little bit. The ones that our team's really focused on were the assessing, and really the ones that we focused the most time on were the ones that were, problematic in business situations. So our team spent a lot of time with those teams, making sure everything was top notch to take advantage of whatever they could. And, try and save and help these businesses. These are people's lives that they've put into this, and, a lot of them have to save jobs and employees' jobs. So that's where we focused a lot of our attention as far as it gets like down to the account level. Britt, I'll let you add your point of view on the accounts that you helped.
Yeah, so I think especially this quarter, and given the like unnatural state of which the like economy was in, none of us really knew exactly from a like past experience standpoint how to handle each account in each business. So it really stemmed from, okay, thinking about these accounts, what type of industry are they in? What type of insights can we pull from a Google standpoint, and strategizing with your teams and understanding, is there demand, is there opportunity for growth, or should we be sticking to running with low budgets, making sure we're as efficient as possible. So this kind of goes back into those conversations about automation and allowing your team to think a little bit more outside the box and at a high level strategy standpoint versus just execution of pulling levers. So I think this is conversation about smart bidding best practices overall, and kind of brings it full circle as to what are the marketing objectives of which, you know, each client has, and making sure it's married back up to the format as well as the smart bidding methods of that match back to that. So with that, what we saw is that outside of Lamarck, but other agencies as well, is that there was adoption across smart bidding methods, again, such as TCPA and TROAS, in order to increase profit and demand. So as a best practice from a smart bidding standpoint, what we would recommend is starting with again, like thinking about the smart bidding method, but then figuring out what is the daily budget of which we would recommend. So as a best practice, we would encourage those daily budgets to be at least 20 to 30% higher than your average campaign daily spend. And again, this really just gives you enough headroom in order to ensure that you're capturing the conversion volume and getting that value of which you want out of the efficiencies. I think another thing too is, as we think about the different buckets of which your business may be in as it relates to COVID-19, is it really efficiency that you're striving for, or is it growth that you're striving for? If it's strong efficiency that you're looking for, then how can you limit spend but consider setting, you know, lower CPAs and higher ROAS goals? If it's growth, then, you know, you're noticing that there's a higher volume and demand, then how can you set higher CPAs but lower ROAS targets overall? So I think the main theme here again is just, how can you marry insights into your strategy and then take advantage of our automation solutions in order to free up time for your teams in order to, versus like executing.
Yeah, no, I love that you shared that, Brittany. You know, I think it's sort of instinctive physiological response of fight or flight, right? When kind of things hit the fan, your instinct is to either coil up and play defense and say, you know what, we're going to take a step back, pull back budgets and so on and so forth. Or you go head on and be strategic and fight that through. For the audience that's listening, TROAS is target return on ad spend. And then TCPA would be target cost per acquisition, cost per sale, cost per order, depending on the type of brand you are. And if you care about lead generation, then TCPL, target cost per lead. You know, something that all of us think a lot about is this concept of growth and efficiency. I think any and every executive I've ever talked to, I ask the question, what do you care about, growth or efficiency? And the answer is always yes. It's both. And so something that I'd love to pick your brain on is today, with all the automation and smart bidding, how does a brand drive scale while being efficient?
Yeah, so I want to go back one quick second real fast.
Sure.
Brittany talked about some of the automation, and one thing that is an automation tool, but for anyone listening who has access to their own Google Ads account can do themselves, is we have something called a recommendations tab. It's very visible within the home screen of your landing page. And with that, it's Google's algorithm giving recommendations on how to make your account more efficient. Now, some of them are budget related and very small increments, but sometimes it'll say like move one budget from this many dollars to this campaign, right? Because it sees more spikes over there. And then some of them are really just efficiency plays, right? So if it's an efficiency play to do X, Y, and Z that helps your business and it has cost you nothing else and it's in line with everything you're trying to do, we really recommend our agency partners as well as everyone else who does on their own to check on the beginning of the week and the end of the week for those recommendations. And if you don't apply all of them, no big deal, right? It gets smarter as it goes on. But if you acknowledge the fact that it's there, dismiss it, it goes away for 90 days. So it doesn't bother you. But that's just one way to understand the automation. And then, you guys as, strategic advisors on the agency side can also utilize that tool to think if it's in line with the strategy you guys are trying to implement. So that's an automation tool, but it's very accessible and topical for everyone to be able to access.
Love that. Brittany, any thoughts on that as we think about, leveraging kind of the Google recommendation tab, but also just within the ad accounts, how do you advise clients think about driving pretty significant scale at 500-600% growth in terms of ad spend efficiently?
Yeah, and I think that the key here is that our recommendations tab is based off of historical data and performance that's coming from each account. So that's why we would encourage the adoption of it, because not only will it get smarter for each account, but it also just helps you understand what is the scale of which you can attain if you adjust bids or budgets. So I think that overall, again, like this is very similar to the stance of which we have within automation, is that recommendations tab, the purpose there is to make sure that this is a easy to use tool and kind of frees up the agency's time and really just parsing out through the campaigns that have headroom and opportunity.
Yeah. When we start to think about the concept of media mix modeling, kind of shifting gears a little bit away from kind of the tactical nature, but more on like broad level media mix strategy, we know that Google plays a critical role in the entire kind of funnel, right, or flywheel of growth. How do you start to design and leverage the Google properties, and where does branded keyword and budget allocation there versus YouTube versus display retargeting? Talk to us a little bit about the conversations you have with the clients that you're servicing across large ad accounts down to early stage companies. Walk us through that media mix that you think about.
You want me to go? Oh.
I'll start. Again, overarching discussion, we start with, what we like to start with is something that Google calls our customer business objectives. So when we start with that, it really sets the stage for everything to funnel down from there, right? If we can understand from the C-suite's point of view that they want to drive 15% growth in this area in the next 12 months, right? That gives us a goal, and we can all backfill the build into what we're trying to do. And even though it might sound the same for a couple different businesses, then you break it down further into, okay, well, what vertical are they in? Who are their competitors? What space do they play in? Do they actually have like stores that would drive additional insight and data for store visits? What type of other products can we use to?
Dan, I think.
Yeah, Dan, I think you.
We lost you for a second.
Are muted, maybe?
Yeah, Dan, I think we lost you. Brittany, why don't you take the question, and we'll get Dan back on.
Yeah, so I think it's a matter of not thinking of each channel based off of where is the user in the funnel, but it's more so how can all of these channels complement one another. So let's just say, for example, within display, we know that 90% of internet users worldwide are on the display network with over 3 million websites and apps. So how can you use that really as a reach standpoint, but then complement it with other strategies? So from a remarketing standpoint, let's just say we know that they have visited your .com site. How can you continue and leverage things such as dynamic remarketing in order to capture them and move them lower down the funnel? So I think that, again, it's really thinking about how can display, shopping, search, and YouTube all complement one another from a strategy standpoint, and not thinking of them so much as a silo strategy.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Dan, are you there? You're good?
I'm here.
Perfect.
I saw both you and Brittany react at the same time, so I stopped talking. So yeah, I was just, she gave a much more detailed, couple levels down answer, but again, it's just starting from the beginning, understanding what the goal is, understanding what strategies then we can build using the products that Google has.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about YouTube. YouTube seems to be a product that I think almost every advertiser, from top of funnel, brand objective, brand awareness, down to direct response, performance marketing, everyone's excited about. Could you share kind of the latest and greatest best practices on YouTube, especially as we think about purchase conversion standard events and video best practices?
Yeah, I can start, Dan. So I think that oftentimes the market really thinks of video as an awareness play. And what we really wanted to solve for is how can you run video, given it's such a different format versus search and shopping. I think the power of video overall is you have the ability to use things such as sight, sound, and motion in order to convey a message to the consumer. Recently we launched the newest DR specific format for YouTube, which is called TrueView for Action. And it's exciting in the sense that this format in particular opens up the opportunity to leverage smart bidding tactics such as maximize conversions, as well as, target CPA. So I think that from a creative standpoint, internally, we really think of it as the ABCDs. So A is how can you attract attention from the start from a video? You know that specifically for, video content, you want to grasp that attention really quickly, because you know that you only have a short period of time before, they move on to other content. I think B is brand naturally with purpose. So how can you make sure that the consumer of which watching the content on the video is directly understanding who is the brand behind the messaging? And then C, connect through emotion and storytelling. So this one particularly is important because, again, how can you reach the consumer in saying what is the problem of which you're trying to solve for them, or what is that product value or benefit that they may find out of purchasing or working with your brand. And then D is direct viewer of what to do next. So thinking about the call to action that you want that user to take from that messaging on YouTube.
Sure. Something that comes to mind is when it comes to creative, repurposing assets that are being used on other platforms, being leveraged accordingly on YouTube. So to give you perspective, back in the day when I was working with a fairly large consumer package, a CPG advertiser, they literally took their television ad, put it on YouTube, and then put that same ad on Facebook and Instagram. And the results that they saw on TV were, because they were large TV advertisers, it didn't match what it saw on digital. And so step one was to get them to create an ad that was going to fit the platform experience and need. The way you and I consume social channels is different than YouTube, is different than TV, is different than other mediums, right? And so walk us through kind of your thoughts on that topic, and then particularly how you educate advertisers that are kind of taking one form of creative and just kind of putting that on every medium, and walk us through that kind of conversation.
Yeah. So I think that in particular, again, like we notice and we recognize for brands, we're not asking to create entirely different videos just for YouTube specifically. And that's why we have a video builder tool in beta, which allows you to take existing assets, whether they're static images or video from TVC or social, and cut it down based off of what the YouTube incentive is. So let's just say, for example, we know that we want to use YouTube in order to drive engagement. How can you use text overlay and really direct call to action in making them find the value and move lower down the funnel? So it's a matter of taking existing assets, but then having the message tweaked depending on what the real like client objective goal is specifically for the YouTube campaign.
Got it. Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I spent 10 years at a TV network, and then I spent 3 years at another TV network doing digital sales strategy. So we spent a lot of time trying to work with our clients on creative for our digital properties for full stream media players. So what I would say there is Google has a lot of resources that an agency like Lamar can help with, where we have done a lot of A/B testing. We have a really cool Google Video Labs team that tests creative all the time, mostly with like the top 100 YouTube spenders. But those practices are then funneled down into best practices for everyone to use, right? So a long time ago, it was funny. They showed a video for a movie trailer, right? And the movie trailer videos that were just on TV, you didn't find out anything about the movie until like 17 seconds into a 60-second clip, right? And those perform so bad on digital streams, right? YouTube being one of them. So what they saw was change that into the first 3 seconds, right? So within 3 seconds, there was like a big graphic from something that happened in the movie. Then it said the name of the movie, then it said the studio, and then people still stayed with the content like 90% longer. So I would say the best practice is utilize, there's a lot of free resources out there as well if you're interested in YouTube, but utilize the resources that are there to tweak your creative. Again, Brittany said, we're not suggesting that everyone creates custom YouTube content for it, but there are things that you should do to be an attention grabber. YouTube has the ability to have 60-second videos on there, but we also have something called bumpers, right? So those bumpers are 6-second creative if you wanted to tell a story, right, about a movie or a product, right, product usage, or many other things, car insurance. A lot of the big car insurance companies out there have done this and tested it because it's really a unique format to do. So with that said, there's plenty of different ways to.
Is he paused?
I feel like Dan is the perfect YouTube guy. He's got the climax. It goes and.
Oh wait, there you're back. You paused at the very end, Dan.
Again, I just saw it went red. Where did I stop?
We can hear you. So it sounds like really what I'm hearing is that start with a climax, then go into what it is, right, and then go into the remaining of the engagement of the video. And I think in most, just if you think about movie production in general, quick bites, short form or long form, it starts with kind of the setup and kind of the build up and the plot, and then the climax, and then the rest of the movie, right? Which is the opposite when we think about just video asset and storytelling. And by the way, as we're thinking about this, I think the vivid nature of this conversation makes it believe that you need to have a large kind of video production capability and like expensive kind of video shoots. You don't. You can legitimately do this from your phone if you wanted to. Build for the people and build for the audience, and start with the main point. We call it like thumb stopping assets, because often we're like scrolling through stuff and reading comments, and like build for the people and build for the customer. And then it goes into the rest of the video. And if they're interested, they'll watch the whole thing. And if not, then, it's okay for someone to consume 50% of your video and take away majority of the takeaways. So I appreciate you both sharing that. And I think Dan,
yeah, I would say 2 last points on that real quick is one, we saw some really successful YouTube campaigns taken from print assets. So they literally took print assets that had no, voiceover or music or anything. And our Video Labs team created those into pretty successful ads. So to your point, you don't need a big budget on that. One thing that we try and emphasize though is to reset your expectations, right? The search budget that you spend on a monthly basis isn't going to be a YouTube budget. And we're not saying that it needs to be larger because we're hungry for money, but you need that space to play in to show the success.
Oh, I think he paused again.
Yeah. But I think we captured the kind of the ethos of that, right? Like when we think about budget allocation, often YouTube gets bucketed into Google. And the reality is that Google, even within Google, you have branded, non-branded, display, shopping, and then YouTube is its own category. And I think we should treat it that way.
Yeah. And I think it's, yeah, like to your point, it's just Google is almost an entirely separate platform than YouTube in itself. So it's kind of a different audience of which you're trying to reach.
Yeah, for sure. Brittany, we have about 7 minutes or so. I'd love to dive into audience Q&A. And there are a handful of questions that have come to us. So the first one is, can you talk a little bit about voice at all? And specifically, how advertising offering is sort of evolving and how brands should think about creating content ahead of paid media?
Yeah, so I'll start with that from background, and Brittany's previous experience also lends itself to, some advertising best practice in that space. But I would say that, content from the TV world, content was king, right? And then how do you take that content and utilize it in front of paid investment? It really depends on the, brand and space that you're in. If you're selling folders, right? Like, that's probably not something where content is as important. But if you can make sure that you're focusing on how the content could play into someone's everyday, as opposed to like being hit and served with an ad, we've seen a lot of success there too. So if you are, a lot of the native advertising that's taking place, especially now with video and programmatic inserts, a lot of it is done in a native way. And if you can align your content in a native way as opposed to a paid way, that's where I've seen agencies and clients suggest the most successful campaigns.
Love that. Love that. Brittany, anything to add there?
No, I think that Dan kind of hit it like right on. I agree that, it definitely is important just to think about creative in an always on lens. Yes, we can easily tweak content from a seasonal standpoint and things that are trending, but how can you create assets in order to take advantage of them, moving forward?
Sure. The next question is really around what data points and factors sort of are the two of you and the rest of the team using as you think about trying to forecast scaling of an ad account? Are there any Google forecasting tools or other tools that you look at and think about?
Yeah, so we have forecasting tools. A great external resource that not a lot of people know about is something called Google Trends. You can play around with that. That's something that is always, being updated when we can share that, which is pretty relevant. It's kind of fun to play around with too. So that's always, you don't need any type of, you can just Google it right now. And then in addition, something that we can run for our, clients and businesses are those types of foresight reports on what could be coming up next, right? So I would say that the data points that we have are also from certain sectors and industries. And also some of them, honestly, Google has a lot of great information, but a lot of it's external. And then, the last piece I would say is, client input, right? As someone who maybe tries to win new business for your agency, you always want to know more from your client, right? So a lot of times they can tell you better than what you might be able to find out there in space. But yeah, I would say, Google has a lot of forecasting tools, but it's a full encompassing plan with a lot of inputs that are some Google and some not.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
I would agree with Dan. A lot of the ways of which we think about potential opportunity for growth and scaling accounts is looking at seasonality and trends of ways of which, they can grow overall. I think also it's a matter of just taking into account within the last 30 days, what is the level of adoption within products? What have those client conversations been, as well as with the agency? So it's a mixture of both insight into client conversations, but also as well as trending data and seasonality. And another plug is, and I think that there's another question just as it relates to trends, so we can talk about that in a bit, but outside of Google Trends, which is available externally. Since COVID-19, we do have a external dashboard called Rising Retail Categories, and it's actually really helpful from an e-com and retail standpoint and really understanding overall from a weekly, monthly, annual standpoint, what are products of which we see that are skyrocketing from a search standpoint.
Well thought. Thank you both for sharing. I think for people that are interested in, I think there's questions around apps and things. So Google Trends, rising retail category. Dan and Brittany, any parting thoughts as we come up on the hour? I want to make sure that all the listeners get an opportunity to hear some parting thoughts as we're going into back half of the year now, and particularly around holiday planning and things of that sort.
Yeah, I will say internally we've spent a little bit of time now. The school year is undetermined right now, but we did see a huge increase in searches for school supplies and products, even at the thought of potential children returning back to schools in the fall. So much like many retailers, think the more insight you have into the next 3 months, and let's call it when normal times return, right? Because right now a lot of is not normal. So, that is my best advice. And I know it's hard to do sometimes, right? To get an understanding of where you're going to be at for those time frames. But I would say the more you can expect things to be 30, 60, 90 days out. And that's where we've seen the most success, even if it does shift, at least knowing that.
For sure. Cool. Well, for anyone listening, what we're planning to do is Lamarck is actually launching a new kind of in the midst of, as companies and brands are recovering from COVID and are trying to get back on track, we're launching Lamarck Insights, essentially a 30-minute consult from myself, anyone on my team. So if you're a brand that just wants to pick our brain or just have a kind of a pro bono consulting opportunity, we want to make sure that we're doing this to support brands and businesses of all sizes and to share our perspective. So please feel free to reach out on lamarckmedia.com anytime, and we'll get one of our specialists or directors or anyone on our team to help. Dan and Brittany, thank you both so much for taking the time. This was awesome, informative, tactical, fun. Really appreciate you both, and we're proud of our partnership with you, and I hope you feel the same, and onward and upward.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we can do in addition, please, let us know if there are any follow-up questions or such.
Will do. Thank you both. We'll talk soon.
Good talking to you.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.